This Chinese mother kept kowtowing, thanking heaven for letting her find her daughter who'd been abandoned 20 years ago. The daughter grew up in America after being abandoned and came back to China just to meet her biological parents. But after they met, one question from the daughter left her Chinese parents silent.
If I was their son instead of a daughter, would grandmother have kept me in the family?
In 2001, a baby girl was abandoned at Guangdong province. A kind person took her to the local welfare institution. A year later, a couple from Ohio, USA, adopted her and named her Grace.
There's Grace, there's May. A scared little baby.
Grace grew up under the loving care of her adoptive parents. She'd cry every time her biological parents were mentioned. She couldn't understand why they'd left her by the roadside. Growing up, she'd unconsciously look for people who looked like her. In August 2022, 20-year-old Grace had grown into a young woman. She was in college and working part-time at a clothing store. Even as an adult, a sense of unease still made her feel lost. Every sleepless night, Grace would ask herself, "Who am I? Where do I come from? Who are my biological parents?" These questions lingered in her mind like a shadow. Her American parents had adopted 3 abandoned babies, treating each as their own. Seeing the kids feel vulnerable, sensitive, and without a sense of belonging always broke the mother's heart. To help Grace live a happy life, her American parents decided to help her find her biological parents in China.
And how much more of just the abandonment part is always in there. And when you see aspects that they aren't happy, it's very difficult. And sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Grace finding her family is perhaps bringing some resolution to the not being wanted. I hope as she continues to explore this, she'll realize that she was wanted.
Despite the countless difficulties, they said they'd try no matter how hard it was. They hoped Grace would feel loved by her biological parents during this journey. With help from volunteers in both China and the U.S., the search made progress quickly. After traveling to many cities, checking countless records, and asking numerous strangers, volunteers finally found a girl in Guangdong who might be Grace's biological elder sister. The girl was a few years older than Grace and looked a lot like her. Grace covered her face, unable to believe it was true. Her American mother wept with joy, truly happy for her daughter. When she saw the sister's photo and that nearly identical face, Grace finally knew it wasn't a dream. 3 months later, Grace took her first flight back to China, to the place where she was born, to meet her biological parents. That's how the opening scene happened. With 24 hours left until the reunion, Grace's Chinese mother kowtowed, thanking heaven for letting her see her daughter again. Though not well off, the parents even borrowed money to host a grand feast with 4 or 5 tables. All relatives and friends came, and Grace's second elder sister, young Tootie, who'd done a DNA test with her, was equally excited. 2 hours before the reunion, Grace's Chinese mother's eyes filled with tears, her heart a mix of emotions. On her way, Grace was extremely nervous, wondering how much her parents had been expecting her. Her 65-year-old father was also worried, afraid she'd blame them, and even more afraid she'd ask that painful question, "Why did you abandon me?" The moment of reunion finally came. As soon as Grace got out of the car, she couldn't help crying. After 20 years apart, this family with shared blood finally had a real reunion. Everyone had tears in their eyes, and the second sister, who spoke English, introduced the 2 families to each other. The second sister chatted warmly with Grace. Above them hung the words, "Welcome home," and relatives and friends greeted her warmly. Coming home was something Grace had dreamed of for 20 years, and now it had come true.
My brother. We are happy happy， 哎呀，冇哭啦，冇哭啦。
Grace's eyes filled with tears as she embraced each family member one by one. Her mom gently told her not to cry. Then, her Chinese birth mother and her American adoptive mother wrapped each other in a heartfelt hug. Two women who once lived worlds apart, complete strangers, were now forever connected by one Chinese girl. After that, Grace and her mother were warmly welcomed by the whole family. Delicious dishes were served, and the parents treated her to the best feast their local area could offer. Abalone, lobster, and all kinds of seafood filled the table. It was Grace's first taste of authentic hometown cuisine. Her biological parents kept urging her to eat more. Relatives kept giving her red envelopes with money, and people kept toasting her with tea. This happy family feast made Grace want to record every moment with her phone. Grace brought photos of herself growing up, and her biological parents looked through them one by one. These were the precious years they'd missed with their daughter. But no matter how warm the moment was, the cruel truth behind it remained. Grace mustered the courage to ask the question that had kept her up at night.
If I was their son instead of a daughter, would grandmother have kept me in the family?
比较现实。
In that moment, her parents were at a loss for words. The person sitting in the center of this photo was Grace's grandmother. It was the strict grandmother who decided to give Grace up for adoption back then. At that time, the village had a strong preference for boys, believing more sons meant less bullying. They hadn't expected Grace to be a girl. With one elder brother and 3 elder sisters already in the family, her birth added more burden. Raising 5 children cost a lot of money. Grace's father, being an honest man, didn't dare go against his mother. Her mother, though heartbroken, had no say in the family. That's how the family made the terrible mistake of abandoning Grace. After thinking for a long time, Grace's parents decided not to lie. They told her the truth.
奶奶咧啲咧，
仔嘅你呢個仔呢我哋呢個。
仔冇有啊，佢就。
Grace just nodded awkwardly. Her father explained their difficulties and helplessness back then and expressed his guilt for not raising her. Grace was truly kind-hearted. She showed deep understanding toward her birth parents, holding no blame, only compassion and warmth.
I understand. I know it's not anyone's fault. I know it's not anyone's fault.
Later, the second sister took Grace to see their ancestral home and a photo of their grandmother. The grandmother had passed away the year before, which made the second sister very sad. She was the first college student in the village, and it was the grandmother who'd used her life savings to fund her education, so she had deep feelings for her. This also reflected the complexity of human nature. The grandmother once abandoned one granddaughter, yet she was willing to spend all her savings to send another to college. It is hard to judge a person as entirely good or entirely bad. At this point, Grace's American mother asked if she could understand her grandmother's decision. Her daughter's answer made her incredibly proud. She was grateful that Grace was such a sensible girl. A reporter asked if she worried Grace might stay in China. She said she did, but would respect whatever Grace chose. That's probably the power of leading by example. Maybe every great child has great parents behind them. In just a few days, Grace no longer felt strange around her biological family. That day, her 3 elder sisters gathered to teach her Mandarin. In the peaceful atmosphere, time seemed to slow down. Happy times are always short, and it was time to say goodbye. The night before leaving, Grace's father told her through a translator, "Going back to America is the right choice. Our family is too poor. You'll have a better life there. We'll be happy as long as you're doing well." Grace cried again. Her father patted her shoulder and said, "It's okay. We're used to this life." His love for her and guilt for the past made him only wish for her happiness. Reunion mattered less than her well-being. At the station, Grace's father took out 2 crumpled stacks of money from his bag. You could tell he'd been saving it for a long time. He handed it to Grace's American mother. She was touched to tears, but didn't accept it, knowing Grace's biological parents needed the money more to improve their lives. Grace's Chinese mother gave her life. Her American parents raised her. Grace said she'd treat both pairs of parents well. After tight hugs and long sobs, they boarded the train. Both families waved goodbye, and Grace cried uncontrollably. The train door closed slowly, and no one knew when they'd meet again. After the train left, Grace's father told the reporter, "Deep down, I've been hoping to find her for a long time." This journey filled a piece in Grace's life puzzle. She finally knew her biological parents loved her too. If I'd been a boy, would Grandma still have abandoned me? When Grace worked up the courage to ask this heart-wrenching question, even the audience was moved. In many Chinese families, this isn't just one child's doubt, but a lingering issue behind generations of silence. In that era of strong preference for boys, too many parents were trapped by fate, feeling guilty for making reluctant, powerless choices due to outdated family views. Maybe they didn't stop loving, they just didn't dare to. Grace's mother is Chen Xuandi, and her second sister is Yang Tudi. Their names have characters common in rural China. Back then, a girl's name often sent a message. You weren't the expected one, just a step in the family's hope for sons. Fortunately, more parents now realize a child's worth shouldn't be defined by gender, and more young people are willing to face their family history, break the silence, and heal the wounds. People often say love is about companionship, but for Grace, love also means acceptance. Accepting an imperfect past, accepting unrepairable mistakes, and accepting the flaws fate left behind.